Good evening, boys and girls, and welcome to another edition of Sunday Night Story. My name is Miss Frazier, and I'm a first grade teacher at RBA. Okay, so tonight we'll be reading Moustache. It is written by Margie Palatini and illustrated by Henry Cole. Moose had a problem, a horrible, hairy, prickly problem. It grew right below his nostrils and just above his upper lip, a moustache. Not a few spare hairs or shy little stubbles, no mere weak wandering whiskers on the upper lip of this moose. No sirree. Moose had a big, bushy, bristly, mighty moustache, but a moustache that was a burly, surly, mangy mess, and it itched a lot. Sure, he plucked and he tweezed, he even clipped, snipped and teased, and his combs were still cowards as his brushes rebelled. His scissors simply surrendered. Moose was in a frizzy tizzy. The moustache was completely crippling his style. He was a great hoofer, but he could barely bop and hip-hop with a moustache going flip-flop. He was a wandering chef, but he simply could not flambe his souffle with all of those whiskers in his way. And he was a daring skier, but how could he downhill race with the mighty moustache blowing in his face? Moose had to do something, and soon. But what? After days and days of much serious thought, Moose got an idea. He crossed some hairs here, he crossed some hairs there, and he tied his moustache around his neck. A moose scarf seemed to be the ideal answer to his problem. It was so simple, so easy, so perfectly perfect. But then his moustache got knotted and mangled and horribly tangled, and those hundreds of hairs still prickled and tickled. Worse, Moose could barely take a breath with all that moustache wrapped around his neck. So Moose untied, unwrapped, unknotted, and gulped in some fresh air. He got another idea. He parted some hairs this way, he parted some hairs that way. He heaped all that moustache on top of his head. Moustachioid antlers seemed to be an ideal answer to his problem. It was so simple, so easy, so perfectly perfect, until a squadron of squirrels and one very nosy gopher moved right into the moose motel. They hurtled and hoarded, furled in, burrowed out. Needless to say, it became quite crowded up there on Moose's head, and heavy and messy. And very, very noisy. The squirreling, chattering, chitting and chatting, squealed and squalled, woke Moose every morning before the crack of dawn, and the gopher was giving the moose one hairy headache. Moose needed his sleep. He needed his rest. He needed his privacy. Moustachioid antlers? Nuts, said Moose. So he unparted, unpiled, untwisted, untwined, and said adios to the hairy horns. But now what? What? The miserable moose took hold of a hunk of hair, and he wrestled it. Then he roped it, he tethered, tied, tamed. A moose tail! Now that was so simple. That was so easy. That was not so perfectly perfect. Talk about a dizzy do. Moose didn't know if he was coming or going. Backwards, forwards, this way, that. He didn't know which end was which. Moose had to bail on the tail. And so he thought, and he thought, and thought some more. But no other idea was a worthy winner. Braids were a bother, a mustache, sweater, too sweltering. Net, not. Poor Moose, his problem was truly terrible, unbearable, just downright sad. He felt so alone, he didn't know what else to do. Then, call it fate, call it destiny, it was probably dumb luck. But one day, Moose tripped on his mustache and just had no time to duck. Oof. Pardon me, they both said as they bumped. Then they blinked and they stared. And their hearts went thumpity thump. She was a moose with a bodacious, outrageous, well, it was just plain old big. Hair after hair piled higher than high, a skyscraping dew of glorious curls, a tower of swirling twists and twirls. She was simply splendid, stupendous, absolutely superb. Of course, Moose had to ask how she did what she did to get such a do. Miss Moose winked and then whispered, just a little glue. So they each plunged a hoof into a fat pot of the white gooey gop. And carefully, oh so carefully, they glopped and they plopped. They paced and they pressed. They coaxed and curled every truly unruly wayward whisker. Around and around, they tweaked and twirled those horrible hairs until Moose, once mangy mess, was now a wondrous, winding wave of marvelous moustache. Moose gazed in the mirror and smiled a broad, moosey smile. He was so happy, so glad, so giddy with glee. He looked dashing and handsome. Goose gushed, "Is that really me?" With not a care for one hair, the moose paired boogied and bopped, and their cooking was hot, hot, hot. So, of course, it wasn't long after that Moose and his mustache and his beautiful bride fox-trotted and tangoed and waltzed down the aisle. Good hair days, bad hair days. They vowed to love and to cherish, and with hearts heaped with love and pots filled with gop, they both signed, "I do," glue, and promise never to part. It was so simple, so easy, so perfectly perfect, and it stuck. That's all for now, boys and girls. Good night.